the next paper, and we'll come back to these issues, on Solomon Mujuru, Youth and Political Change.
Right, it's 2:55, so I'll start with 3:10.
Yes.
The individual I want to talk about, in some ways, number one, I will dwell on three themes, mainly: violence, displacement, and the role of educational networks. Educational networks kind of complements what Dan had to say. But unlike the figures Dan is discussing, these are all university individuals. Solomon Mujuru never makes it to university. Is grade 7. That's the highest level of education in regions. So what I will talk about in terms of his engagement with politics, if you will, in his youth, is him in primary school, those experiences. Then I'll speak a bit about the significance of violence here and displacement. And the reason I'm talking about violence and displacement is there's a notion here, the title, intergenerational, of the movement. But what I want to emphasize here in talking about violence and displacement is how certain themes in one's youth never go away. So you're not really moving, in a sense that even as you grow older. There are aspects I'll dwell on here. Is at Mujuru school. And his teacher is one Kumbirai Kangai, who a lot of you will know, who later as a post-1980 a cabinet minister and a key nationalist figure himself in the 1970s with Zanu. And at that time, one of the other important or significant individuals at Mujuru school is one Rugari Gumbo. And this Kangai, who's a teacher, he's teaching them about, to quote Solomon Mujuru himself, he was teaching us politics, that whites were wrong to take over our country, that they were oppressing us, and that we must organize ourselves to get freedom. Kangai did all of this teaching very secretly at night. So this is what they're being exposed to at that time. The consequence of this is that there's a sense of rebelliousness that begins to arise. And at that time, it's NDP first and then later ZAPU. These were the real parties or liberation movements, if you will, of the time. And here I want to draw on a testimony by a chap called David Tonlana. David Tonlana, another key war veteran, was Solomon Mujuru's cousin. Their moms were sisters, so they grew up together during this time. And Tonlana says something here that's really interesting, that because of all this politicization of school, children they became rather rebellious in school, and not so much because they were young, not so much engagement with national politics, but very localized grievances, whether it's a grievance with corporal punishment at school, right? Or certain teachers that had certain teaching practices that they didn't agree with. So there's an air of rebelliousness, and I want to bring up Tonlana here because he says if whenever I did something naughty or rebellious at school that my father disagreed with, he would automatically say to me, which means you're doing Zapu things. So, a Zapu, he's not to say that he was involved in national Zapu politics, but, a Zapu became a metaphor, if you will, for, the tomfoolery of youth in the early 1960s. And it was rebuked as such by elders who were attempting to maintain control over an increasingly restless youth. So that's one aspect. So what's being taught, and Mujuru himself is very clear that Kangai's teachings in school, not much of this is registered. We're still very young. So even him, it's like we didn't really understand national politics in Europe. But here, educational networks matter for a different reason. So it's not so much that that they leave with grand ideas or ideological positions. But what happens later in life, when he then grows up later in life, he's expelled the school for indiscipline, moves to Bulawayo to work in Bulawayo, 1960s Bulawayo, working at Dunlop, a tire company. He then becomes involved in the ZAPU Youth League. And the reason he's drawn into the ZAPU Youth League, according to him, is because a lot of his old friends from Zimuto school, where he was expelled, all that the late night teachings with Kankai, are also in Bulawayo at the time. So they reconnect. And it's through those old networks that they actually get drawn into national politics properly. So it matters for different, unlike Dan's subjects who are really engaged with this stuff and thinking. These chaps are not thinkers, they're people of action. And those old school networks enable action later in life. So that's education done with. But I want to then talk about things that stay, because there's a sense here of a progression. And I'm kind of saying that there is much in the youth that stays throughout life. And one key element here would be violence. Solomon Mujuru was a god of violence. This is a man of violence through and through. And it works in a number of ways. Number one is he has a brutal father. His mom dies when he's 2. His father ships him off to go live with his sister. He comes back during vacations, but the father is a very, very brutal man, a very strict individual. And Solomon himself in his youth, when he was a child, couldn't talk for long periods. And when he eventually begins to talk, he has a stutter. And the stutter stayed with him to his dying days. But it creates insecurity in him. And he was often bullied and teased by other kids because he couldn't talk. And his response to that was to get physical. So he was involved in a lot of fights with other herd boys, herding cattle and stuff. So these violence it's there from early on. But where the father comes in, and this is testimony from his brothers and sisters, he's come back from herding cattle. Maybe he's gotten beat up. He often didn't win the fights, so he gets beat up. What his father would do is, what happened? Oh, I got into a fight, I got beat up. The father doesn't ask him, doesn't say sorry or try to dissuade him from fighting. He says, come over here, let me see where your wounds are. If Solomon's wounds were on his back or the back of his head, he'd get a beating from his father. And the argument was you got beat up because you were running away from the fight. So that's life there. And then in Bulawayo as well, with the ZAPU Youth League, they're trying to organize. And it's a time, the 1960s Bulawayo, where there's Mashonaland United versus Matabeleland United. And if you go back to the histories of these football clubs in that time, they were running street battles between, so whenever Mashonaland United came to, say, Bulawayo to play Matabeleland United. And Solomon was a fan of Mashonaland United. And there's no evidence as such direct that he was involved in that hooliganism of the time. But again, he obviously witnessed this. They say again, it's the proximity to violence. And then the choice to go to war as well, to leave Bulawayo, go to Zambia, to sign up and become a soldier. It's a life of violence too. So that stays with him. 1980, he becomes involved in integrating the army and becomes army commander from that time. Earlier we had a session on Gukurahundi. Solomon Mujuru is the head of the army during Gukurahundi. More violence. The 1980s is also the war in Mozambique, a very, very long campaign. He was at the helm of running that too. So violence stays with him. And then for it to come to the very end as well, 15 August 2011, what does this man do? He dies in a fire, very suspiciously, a violent death. So certain themes stay. It's no movement as such. The last I'll bring up is around displacement. This is another thing that stays. So I mentioned his mom dying at an early age. So he's moved around, stays with his sister, will go back to his father's during school holidays. Moves to Bulawayo eventually. From Bulawayo moves again to Zambia to join ZAPU in the struggle. Arrives in Zambia, is sent to Russia. There's training in Tanzania. There's training in Bulgaria. He goes to China. Eventually, he defects from Zapu to Zanla in 1971. And in that sense, he moves to Mozambique. And the life of a guerrilla, Zanla guerrilla, it was, as a freedom fighter, it entailed constant movement as well, into Rhodesia and back, right? And then eventually there is no respite even when you return to Mozambique, because he becomes chief of operations. The Zanla chief of operations had overall charge of the Zanla camps in Mozambique. So he moved from camp to camp as well there. So this is a life of constant movement. And what happens is in post-1980, the lasting effects of the displacement that he lived from childhood to adulthood. You see it through his behaviors after 1980 as well. There's no sense of rootedness. Whether it's, for example, if I can take a quick example, women. He moved from one woman to another constantly, right? And again, even in terms of profession, by 1986, he already wants to retire from the army. It's Mugabe who insists that he hangs on for a while. When he does leave, he becomes a member of parliament, quits after one term to focus on business. So there's a constant restlessness throughout his life, and you can locate that in the experiences of youth as well. Then the last thing I want to say, education done, violence done, is around this, because clearly these are young people. I want to stress something about faults and then speak to the notion of change. Look, Solomon was 36 years old when he became Lieutenant General and head of the Zimbabwean Army in 1981. Now, that's in the mid-1980s. The average ages by rank in the British Army, from a general downwards, were, if you were a general, you'd be 57 years old. Lieutenant General, you'd be 54. Major General, you'd be 52. A Brigadier, you'd be 50. Colonel, you'd be 49. Lieutenant Colonel, you'd be 45. Major, 41. And here's Nombo, 36, is Lieutenant General, head of the Army. So that's going by age only. If Solomon Mujuru was a soldier in the British Army in the 1980s, he would likely have been a captain at best. Right? So he shouldn't be head of the Army at that age. He was extremely young and inexperienced for the conventional ZNA commander post he reached in 1981. So inexperience comes with naivety. And throughout his army career, there's an impure professionalism. He had at times unpredictable behavior and moments of indecision when he was head of the army. And a lot of mistakes, horrible occurrences happened. We heard earlier about the presentation of the Gukurahundi. And one reason I'm saying this, I am not saying this to somehow lessen crimes, abuses, or mistakes, but I also think it's important to appreciate something that's so often missed. These were very young people. So some of these excesses that yes, you were responsible, but also remember, it's I would say, we also should keep it in context as well. It's youth. They were extremely young folks. And then that said, this notion of change, I mean, I want to bring this to the present. This generation, they come back 1980, they're extremely young, but it's remarkable. And one of if you think about the present, one of the charges against Nelson Chamisa as head of the MDC, and this is not a pitch for MDC, it's just pointing out, is the fact that he's 40 years old, too young, you know that. But this is the same nationalist generation and freedom fighters who brought independence were even younger. Right. So there's a sense in which, at least within ZANU nationalism, there's been a stagnation, really, lack of generational renewal. And if Mnangagwa does win 5 years, his term, he'll be 83 when he finishes his first term. If he wins his second term, he'll be 88. Right. So there's been really a lack of generational renewal, if you will. Anyway, that's not a pitch for MDC, but I'll stop there.
So there we have it. I said Rex Nongo was a disappointment by 1988. You didn't disappoint, sir. That was brilliant.